Is seeking to take full advantage, and if you believe the latest polls, he is making progress 1 week before Election Day. The latest ABC Washington Post tracking poll has Trump leading nationally by 1 point. That, for those who are asking, is a Democrat plus 10 poll. But in that poll, with likely voters expected to vote on Election Day, Trump now leads 50-39. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harridge begins our coverage tonight with the latest on the email investigation. Good evening, Catherine.
But a government official confirmed today that FBI Director James Comey and his boss, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, had met for the first time after his decision to reinitiate the Clinton email case. The official characterized the meeting as cordial as the review shifts into high gear.
Two intelligence sources report that over the weekend, a multi-agency task force from the Clinton email case was re-engaged, with analysts working overlapping shifts covering 16 hours a day to identify new classified material. The objective was more clarity on the records recovered from Anthony Weiner's computer for FBI Director James Comey if he faced more pressure for answers, and to assess if intelligence sources and methods were compromised. FBI forensic computer experts developed a software program with key search terms called deduping, which knocks out duplicates. And with Sunday's warrant, investigators can now read the email content. The first step is relatively quick.
You can process a very large volume of emails to eliminate duplicates, eliminate redundancies, and really focus your attention on the documents in those emails that are new.
If new records are identified, a second phase kicks in, known as, quote, eyes on. That's an FBI phrase for physically reviewing the emails and then farming them out to intelligence agencies for final classification. The Trump campaign believes highly sensitive documents are on the computer.
The Bureau is having to get cleared personnel to be able to look at these emails. So if they're looking for cleared personnel, that means that they've probably discovered classified information in this 650,000.
The FBI is not commenting, as the Justice Department sent this letter to Capitol Hill pledging every available resource to expedite the review before Election Day. But the Justice Department official who wrote the letter, Peter Kadzik, has now surfaced in WikiLeaks. In the September 2008 email, John Podesta recommends Kadzik for a supportive role in the campaign, calling him, quote, a fantastic lawyer who kept me out of jail. Meantime, Karen Dunn, an attorney representing Huma Abedin, Weiner's estranged wife, is telling reporters that Abedin was surprised to learn her emails were on the computer. Quote, from the beginning, Ms. Abedin has complied fully and voluntarily with State Department and law enforcement requests, including sitting for hours-long interviews and providing her work-related and potentially work-related documents.
And late today, the conservative group Judicial Watch released new Clinton emails uncovered by the FBI in the first review. The records show that in November 2010, Secretary Clinton's unsecured server was attacked 10 times in 2 days. The Secret Service was informed, though the FBI director said in July there was no evidence of a breach, though he could not rule it out. Brett.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now to WikiLeaks. The numbers are staggering. 25 document dumps so far, encompassing some 42,000 emails. Yet that is just 1/15 the number of emails reportedly found on Anthony Weiner's laptop that the federal task force is combing through. You just heard about that. That does not mean the WikiLeaks emails are not revealing quite a lot about what was happening behind the scenes inside the Clinton campaign and potentially doing damage to the Clinton brand and Hillary Clinton's campaign. Here's Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry.
An explosive new email shows Bill Clinton lined up a cool $6 million for his foundation from Sheikh Mohammed of Ethiopia with a mere phone call. One aide writing it would be crazy to go all the way to Ethiopia for a conference, quote, unless Sheikh Mo has sent us a $6 million check. Longtime Clinton aide Bruce Lindsay replies, if the call is made, it will help us get the $6 million. I think he should call. Bill Clinton also wanted more foreign donations if they're submitted to, quote, an independent body for review. The obvious challenge with this is that there is no independent body to make that review. And a newly leaked email from March 2nd, 2015, the night the New York Times revealed Clinton used a private email account as Secretary of State, shows campaign chairman John Podesta wrote Cheryl Mills, not to sound like Lanny, but we are going to have to dump all those emails, so better to do so sooner than later. A reference to damage control expert Lanny Davis, known for urging the Clintons to err on the side of transparency. Except the timeline created by these WikiLeaks disclosures show a far different approach of holding back information, starting with the candidate. When the Times story first crossed on March 2nd, Podesta asked campaign manager Robbie Mook if he had any idea of the depth of it. Mook replied, nope. On March 4th, Republican Trey Gowdy, chair of the Benghazi Committee, subpoenaed Clinton's emails. That same day, citing executive privilege, Podesta wrote Mills, "Think we should hold emails to and from the president?" March 7th, President Obama said he learned about Clinton's email system from news reports. Mills writes, "We need to clean this up. He has emails from her. They do not say state.gov." That same day, Philippe Reines writes, "There is just no good answer for the server." The FBI later revealed somewhere between March 25th and the 31st, BleachBit was used to delete Clinton's archive. Though she maintained on March 10th, the State Department already had official emails.
To err on the side of providing anything that could be possibly viewed as work-related.
Now, we've obtained talking points for Bill Clinton's $6 million phone call, which noted he went to the Sheikh's private suite at a nightclub in Ethiopia and played the saxophone. But aides warned him the Sheikh, who committed to giving up to $20 million, felt some of this was coercion. Brett, that's from an aide to Clinton saying he felt like it was coercion.
Amazing. Ed, thanks.
Good to see you.
Now to the nominees. Both are focusing on major battleground states as we approach the final week of the campaign. Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin is in Florida with the Clinton team.
He calls women ugly, disgusting, nasty all the time. He calls women pigs, rates bodies on a scale from 1 to 10.
Clinton tried to stay on offense, releasing this attack ad targeting Trump's treatment of women.
I'd look her right in that fat, ugly face of hers. She ate like a pig.
The Real Clear Politics average of Florida polls show Donald Trump up by nearly a point. Late last week, Trump led 53 to 51 points in enthusiasm. As of this poll's release, he leads 53 to 43, a sharp decline for Clinton in recent days.
We want email!
Clinton was greeted by Trump protesters at her first stop. Newly released archival documents by the FBI today of an investigation it wrapped up 11 years ago into President Clinton's last-minute pardon of Democratic donor Mark Rich raised eyebrows among Clinton campaign staff that the FBI again was interfering with the U.S. election with just a week to go. Quote, absent a FOIA litigation deadline, this is odd. Will FBI be posting docs on Trump's housing discrimination in 70s? A senior law enforcement official tells Fox that this release was done in response to a standing FOIA request, adding these releases happen as soon as they're ready for public consumption and suggesting the timing of today's FOIA dump was a coincidence. Clinton heads to Arizona tomorrow, a traditionally red state that the campaign believes that they can flip. Her running mate Tim Kaine will give a speech there on Thursday entirely in Spanish, a sign of just how important the campaign feels the Latino vote is in these final days. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin with the Clinton campaign. Jennifer, thank you. Republicans are not relying only on the email scandal to try to swing late deciding voters. They are also seizing on recent negative news about skyrocketing premiums and deductibles with Obamacare. Chief political correspondent Carl Cameron has that story tonight from Wisconsin.
Adding more policy to his closing pitch, Donald Trump in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, renewed his promise to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act on this, the first day of open enrollment for next year's coverage.
I will ask Congress to convene a special session so we can repeal and replace. And we will do it very, very quickly. It is a catastrophe.
The Obama administration announced recently that premiums are going up a minimum of 25% across the country.
Here in Pennsylvania, premiums are going to increase more than 60%. That means parents won't have enough money to pay their bills or get medicine for their kids.
The Republican ticket reunited on the road, giving running mate Mike Pence a chance to cast Trump's recent surge in the polls in part to their plans to end Obamacare.
The latest polls have Donald Trump leading nationwide. Democrats and independents are joining this movement. Republicans across the country coming home.
Though Trump's polls have improved, he's still being outdone on the ground game and in the air war. The Clinton camp released a lengthy statement and tweeted a link to reporting by the liberal website Slate last night, suggesting one of the Trump Tower's computer servers has communicated with Russia's Alpha Bank. The Trump campaign denies that. The Clinton camp called it the most direct link yet between Donald Trump and Moscow. But the feds say, as part of their ongoing investigation into Russia's attempted interference in the U.S. election process, they've as yet found no connection to Trump. The FBI has has opened a preliminary inquiry into former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort for consulting work done years ago for Ukraine's Russian-backed president. Manafort has said he has heard nothing about it. Separately, the New York Times says documents show Trump avoided paying millions of dollars in income taxes when his creditors decades ago forgave millions of dollars in debt, which he did not report as income. The legal loophole has since been outlawed by Congress. Brett.
Carl Cameron, live with the Trump campaign in Eau Claire. Carl, thanks. Federal agents are dealing with a growing challenge at the border with Mexico. The Homeland Security Department says an increasing number of people from far-flung corners of the world are now trying to sneak into the U.S. via that route. More than 8,000 people from India, China, Romania, Bangladesh, Nepal were arrested between October 2015 and this past August. Residents of Philadelphia are trying to cope with a transit strike tonight. About 5,000 workers have walked off their jobs. The Philadelphia system provides about 900,000 rides a day. The strike does not affect commuter rail lines and service in areas outside the city. Stocks were down today. The Dow lost 105. The S&P 500 dropped 14. The Nasdaq was off 36. Tonight's Issues That Matter report deals with a real pocketbook issue, the federal deficit. That's the amount of money the U.S. spends each year that it technically does not have. Those annual deficits add up to the national debt, which is closing in on $20 trillion with a T. Tonight, Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Bream tells us it's a numbers game Americans like you seem to be losing.
I don't think either candidate really gives much of a damn about the debt issue.
Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have talked about it.
Reduce our $18 trillion in debt because, believe me, we're in a bubble. We have artificially low interest rates. Be careful of a bubble, because what you've seen in the past might be small potatoes compared to what happens. So be very, very careful.
And for Clinton, it was part of her final argument in the last debate about why she's the right one to tackle the now nearly $20 trillion beast.
I pay for everything I'm proposing. I do not add a penny to the national debt. I take that very seriously because I do think it's one of the issues we've got to come to grips with.
Yet for all their talk about the debt, neither has been very specific about actually reducing it.
Anyone who's watched the debates, we've seen sort of the occasional references to it, but not really any sort of substantive plans for how to deal with the national debt.
Entrepreneur Will Harper knows about debt. He elected to take on more of it to get his MBA, and then again as the founder of a startup. It's part of his daily reality.
I'm paying more in servicing my debt each month than I am in rent.
For Harper, it's a calculation about what debt now can offer versus value later, a conversation he doesn't think the candidates are having with Americans.
I gained tremendous benefits from having done an MBA, from the education, from the network. And I think in the long term, that's going to pay off. And so I hope that our political discourse around the debt will look to find that calculation. Is what we're getting good enough to justify the expense, and particularly the expense that we're going to be paying for in the future?
Each year, the federal deficit is the difference between what the government takes in and what it spends. Since 2002, we've always been in the red, starting with a shortfall that year of nearly $158 billion. By 2004, the yearly deficit had climbed to $413 billion and began to taper off a bit. The number jumped again in 2008 to $459 billion. And from 2009 to 2012, we hit deficits well over $1 trillion every single year. By 2015, that number had slowed, something the Obama administration touts, but still left the federal government $438 billion in the hole for that year. Those repeated deficits have combined to push our overall national debt to more than $19.8 trillion. That equates to a burden on every taxpayer of nearly $167,000. It's grown a whopping 240% since 2001 and shows no signs of slowing down. And while the problem is a very real one, the consequences don't seem to be, at least not yet.
Little bits of it become due each year, and they're refinanced, and they're refinanced with imaginary money created by the Federal Reserve. It's not real money, but we accept it as if it were real money. We're all sort of living in a gigantic Disneyland of fake money.
This is a problem where both parties are basically unwilling to either acknowledge the problem or do take the serious steps that are necessary to deal with the problem.
Scour both candidates' websites, and you won't see much on the topic. Trump mentions it as a key issue, but without a plan to get rid of it, other than an overall discussion of improving the economy. On the issues section of Clinton's website, the words national debt don't seem to appear at all. Which brings us back to Will Harper, who doesn't have the luxury of ignoring the debt he's incurred. He's used to making significant sacrifices, and he thinks Americans are ready to have a conversation about how we all can, if we actually want to put the country back into the black.
If debt is a thing that we do need to bring down, then how can we all take on the consequences of bringing it down rather than try and have someone else pay the consequences of reduced spending?
One expert I talked with said the $20 trillion in debt is just the tip of the iceberg. That if we factored in all the debt obligations the federal government has made into the future, the figure is actually closer to $100 trillion. Brett.
Amazing. Shannon, thank you. Tomorrow, our Issues That Matter series continues with number 4, race relations. Mike Tobin reports from Chicago. Up next, with all the talk about Russia this election cycle, a story about how the Clintons helped Russia get control of half of America's uranium. Now tonight's installment of our look at how the Clinton finances, the Clinton Foundation, and the Clintons' ambitions often intersect. Few stories have generated more controversy than the reports the Clintons facilitated a deal to give Russia control of American uranium. The reporters themselves have actually been assailed, including Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter Jo Becker, who we have interviewed several times on her work. Becker has stood by her story amid withering criticism from the Clinton campaign.
Foreigners cannot donate to a presidential campaign. That's meant to limit the influence of foreign governments and foreigners on our political process. But they can legally donate to charitable foundations like the Clinton Foundation.
Billionaire businessman Frank Giustra, a Canadian, is a friend of the Clintons and a large donor to their foundation. And he had an interest in uranium mines located in Kazakhstan.
Bill Clinton has a public press conference with President Nazarbayev where he praises his rule and praises his human rights record. But the bottom line is, after they leave, a couple of days later, Frank Giustra gets his uranium concessions, which end up being enormously lucrative to him and to a small group of Canadian mining investors.
His company was like a bit player and really had gone from a worthless shell company overnight, got this huge uranium mining deal. And then soon after that, Bill Clinton got a huge donation, $31 million from Frank Giustra to his charitable foundation, followed by a pledge to donate $100 million more.
So what happened to Giustra's company that benefited from that deal in Kazakhstan?
What happened was Mr. Giustra's company merged with another company called Uranium One, and that was in 2007. Mr. Giustra told us that he, at that point, sold his shares and got out of the business. And the new company, of course, has the Kazakhstan assets that Mr. Giustra acquired, and it also starts to go on a buying spree in the United States.
And then the Russians bought it.
They would acquire what would amount to 50% of projected uranium output by 2015.
In other words, Russia took control of what was projected to be up to half of America's uranium.
Now, does Secretary Clinton factor into this?
For that deal to go through, it needs federal government approval, and one of those people that has to approve that deal is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Who, as Senator Clinton, was vigorously opposed to these kind of buys from countries into U.S. property.
That's a great point, Brett. You remember the Dubai Ports deal, for example, which he was opposed to.
We believe that no foreign government should control our ports.
In this particular case, we're talking about uranium. We're talking about things that relate to the nuclear industry. We're talking about the Russian government,
which already provides equipment, material to Iran.
That's correct.
It took Schweitzer some digging to figure out how deeply those uranium interests were invested in the Clintons.
So let's go to the Fernwood document.
Well, Fernwood Foundation is an entity in Canada controlled by Ian Telfer, who ends up being the chairman of Uranium One, which is the Russian-owned uranium company. Ian Telfer, in 2007, made an individual contribution to the Clinton Foundation. They did disclose that. The problem is, based on Canadian tax records, in this particular case, made a payment of $250,000 to the Clinton-Juster Sustainable Growth Initiative. They are required to disclose the donation. They failed to do that. This is a hidden contribution. And over the course of a couple of years, you're talking about more than $2 million from the Fernwood Foundation to the Clinton Foundation. When you actually go to the Clinton Foundation website itself on disclosures and type in Fernwood, you find no contributions listed whatsoever.
When Mrs. Clinton became Secretary of State, she signed a memorandum of understanding with the Obama White House because they understood that having a Secretary of State whose husband is collecting money from various foreign interests could potentially pose conflicts of interest. And so they laid down certain rules. They said you can't take money from a foreign government. And they also required that the Clintons make all of their donors to their family foundation public. And contrary to the agreement that they had with the White House, those donations were never made public.
Ian Telfer told the New York Times that he made the donations based on his wish to personally support Mr. Giustra in his charitable work, not based on any relationship to the Clintons. He also said that he never spoke to either President Clinton or then Secretary Clinton about his company, Uranium One. Frank Giustra has said, quote, "The New York Times story presents no evidence of wrongdoing or impropriety, but rather is replete with innuendo and irresponsible, unfounded speculation." The Clinton campaign had this to say about both Schweitzer and the New York Times reporting. Clinton campaign spokesman Brian Fallon said, quote, "Hillary Clinton herself did not participate in the review or direct the department to take any position on the sale of Uranium One."
The campaign said typically these kinds of decisions don't go all the way up to the secretary and instead are decided at the assistant secretary level. And they produced an assistant secretary to say that she had never intervened on any case that he was involved in. But what they didn't say or couldn't answer is, was she briefed? Before this decision was made? They didn't say.
Fallon also says, quote, "Without presenting any direct evidence in support of the claim, the Times story, like the book on which it is based, wrongly suggests that Hillary Clinton's State Department pushed for the sale's approval to reward donors who had a financial interest in the deal."
Our story doesn't say that. Our story is about how some of the biggest donors to Bill Clinton's foundation built, financed, and eventually sold off to the Russians a company that held huge stakes in Kazakhstan and known American uranium reserves. While she was Secretary of State, the chairman of that company made undisclosed donations during that same time frame. She was part of a process that reviews deals like this, where you have a strategic asset and implications for national security.
Becker also takes issue with the Clinton campaign implying her reporting had anything to do with Peter Schweitzer, who you also heard in that segment. To the contrary, Becker says the Times did its own investigating and interviews for its report. As we told you earlier, House Speaker Paul Ryan said today he did vote for Donald Trump, saying he voted for the GOP nominee. But Ryan reiterated he will not be campaigning for Trump. Some other top Republicans have also withheld their support from the Republican nominee, even though they had promised to support the eventual winner of the primaries. Correspondent Doug McKelway is here to tell us who's breaking that promise. Good evening, Doug.
Evening, Brett. You know, it was well over a year ago at the first 2016 GOP presidential debate in August of 2015, where you posed a question to the then 10 candidates: will you pledge to support the eventual GOP nominee for president?
Raise your hand now if you won't make that pledge tonight. Mr. Trump. So, to be clear, standing on a Republican primary debate,
I fully understand.
The place where the RNC will give the nominee the nod.
I fully understand.
Well, as it turned out, Trump, for now obvious reasons, is honoring that pledge, but another candidate has broken it. John Kasich, the governor of the must-win key swing state of Ohio, voted absentee yesterday for a write-in candidate, Senator John McCain. It's a vote that doesn't even count in that crucial state because McCain's name is not among the 18 certified write-ins. Some see Kasich's write-in vote as a symbolic middle finger flicked at the GOP nominee.
I'm going to say to John Kasich, if you're watching, you signed a pledge. You signed a pledge saying that you would support the Republican nominee for president. You promised that you would follow through with that. Jeb Bush, I would say the same thing to you. You signed a pledge.
Most of Trump's other vanquished primary foes have swallowed their pride and plan to vote or have already voted for him. They include Senator Rand Paul, former Governor Mike Huckabee, Dr. Ben Carson, Governor Scott Walker, and Senator Ted Cruz. Still licking his Trump-inflicted wounds, Florida Senator Marco Rubio also voted for Trump, but when asked about it, seemed disinclined to admit it.
Who'd you vote for?
Marco Rubio.
For president?
Nothing's changed on that. I'm not voting. In fact, I think the events of the last 72 hours reminds us of, this country, really, we can't have a president that's under FBI investigation.
Carly Fiorina was not on that main stage at that first debate, but after the Trump-Billy Bush controversy, she pushed for Governor Pence to head the ticket, and like all the others, has been vigorously campaigning against Trump and for GOP candidates at the statewide races. Brett, back to you.
Doug, thank you. In international headlines, Iraqi special forces have entered the outskirts of Mosul and are encountering some stiff resistance from ISIS there. It's the first time Iraqi forces have set foot in the city since ISIS took over more than 2 years ago. The majority of the Iraqi military still about 6 miles from the city center. We'll keep you updated. Benjamin Hall on the ground. North Korea is preparing to fire another medium-range ballistic missile in the next 24 to 72 hours, according to authorities. That's what 2 U.S. officials are telling Fox News tonight. Last month, the communist country attempted 2 such launches, and the U.S. military says both failed. Americans in India are being warned about possible terror strikes. The U.S. Embassy in New Delhi is calling on American citizens there to be vigilant following reports ISIS terrorists may be planning to attack targets inside the country. Saturday, the State Department ordered the evacuation of family members of the U.S. consulate staff in Istanbul, Turkey. We are 1 week away from Election Day here in the U.S. The FBI email investigation, latest from WikiLeaks, and certainly that's all making it interesting. We'll head to the campaign trail and we'll talk with our panel after the break.
If we don't repeal and replace Obamacare, we will destroy American health care forever. It's one of the single most important reasons why we must win on November 8th.
Well, I learned way back in elementary school, and I learned it in Sunday school. It's not okay to insult people. And look at what he does. He calls women ugly, disgusting, nasty all the time. He calls women pigs, rates bodies on a scale from 1 to 10.
That's the campaign trail today. Here is the latest in the polls. The latest poll is a tracking poll, ABC Washington Post, which puts Donald Trump up 46-45 in the four-way race. Interestingly, voting early versus on Election Day, and here you see the breakdown. Hillary Clinton 54-41. Donald Trump, likely voters on Election Day 50-39, and then enthusiastic, tracking very enthusiastic about a candidate, and you see Saturday, Sunday, Donald Trump 53-43, and that changed from Thursday, Friday, 53-51. Here are the candidates today. Sometimes it tells us what they're doing as far as the campaign's focus. Donald Trump in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. His VP nominee, Mike Pence, also in Pennsylvania twice with 2 stops. Hillary Clinton in Dade City, Florida, 3 stops in Florida today. Bill Clinton also in Florida. Tim Kaine in Appleton, Wisconsin and Madison, Wisconsin. President Obama in Columbus, Ohio. Vice President Biden in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Bernie Sanders in Portland, Maine. Maine has had a lot of people there this year for 2 electoral votes. Let's bring in our panel. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, a lot has happened, Mercedes, over a short time. The question is, how much is it changing the map?
That's a great question. I mean, you would think there's been such a huge turn of events with the FBI reopening the case, WikiLeaks exposing a lot of this corruption of what the Clinton campaign advisors have been talking about, whether it's Podesta dumping the emails. I think that, look, there's a real challenge here, which is that although the Democrats are feeling this anxiety, there's this panic mode right now within the Democratic Party, within the Clinton camp, they're still feeling pretty confident about the electoral map. For Trump, it is critical for him to either get, besides those 6 key battleground states, Florida, Iowa, North Carolina, I mean, you're talking Maine, Ohio, Nevada, the 3 other states he's got to be looking at, that's only 266 electoral votes plus everything else that Romney won. It's going to be, what, Pennsylvania, Colorado, or New Hampshire?
Michigan,
those are still, or Michigan. That's still a bit of an uphill battle, but that is where I think you're going to see the campaign, the Trump campaign focusing on. And if he's able to deliver that message that he did today on Obamacare, on trade, very effective, on message, I think it could definitely help him. Whether he can win it, that's a different story.
What's interesting, AB, is that the Trump message today was really on Obamacare and jobs, and he largely stuck to the script almost completely. The Hillary Clinton message today was about women and temperament and what he says about women and has in the past. And it coincided with an ad that they put out today.
Yeah, well, let's start with Trump. I thought it was very effective to focus on Obamacare, and I actually think this issue was moving the polls away from Hillary Clinton last week, even before the big shocker on Friday.
We should point out today's the open enrollment day for Obamacare.
Right, and these premium hikes have been just devastating. Really, she can't defend them. He's been campaigning on them for over a week in the right places, and it's going to be a huge issue, I think, when you look back at the exit polling after the results come in. Hillary Clinton has no choice but to finish this campaign, although she wanted to end on sort of a give the voters something about me pitch. She can't. She's trying to deflect away from the FBI. She's spending too much time talking about Jim Comey. So she needs to go back to scaring Republican women who are never going to vote for Trump into getting in the car and supporting her. And that's why she's using Alicia Machado and all this other stuff. It's not what she wanted to do.
It's not a motivating message,
they
right?
think it's the only base play they've got.
That's the base play. All right, Charles, Mercedes mentioned the Podesta email that was in WikiLeaks today. Here it is, email chain 1. It's an exchange between John Podesta and Cheryl Mills, former chief of staff for Hillary Clinton. This comes on March 2nd, the day in 2015, the day the New York Times breaks the story about the emails. John Podesta says, "We are going to have to dump all those emails, so better do so sooner than later." Cheryl Mills responds, "Think you just got your new nickname." Now, the campaign, asked about this, said he was talking about dump, meaning get out the emails, release them. The problem is that what happened? I mean, they chose to release some, and then they destroyed 33,000 of them with the bleach bit. The other problem is, well, a couple problems. One is they, by commenting on this email, authenticated the email and the emails that they haven't done before. And the other thing is, if they were going to dump the emails, they would have been dumping classified information.
There is a word, if you want to release emails, there is a word for that. It's called release. He didn't use the word release, he used the word dump. Dump means you're releasing something, but you're doing it in a way that it will disappear. Now, it seems to me quite obvious what's going on here. The instinctive reaction of the campaign, again, reflecting the candidate herself, is to dump, is to hide, is to cover. That's been the way the Clintons have operated for 30 years, and that's what they ended up doing. They ended up segregating 30,000 emails and then destroying them so that, as Trey Gowdy said, even God can't read them now. Look, what's happening here is she is now drowning in the cumulative effect of the WikiLeaks and of the FBI deal. She can't get her message out. I think AB's exactly right. When you have to bring Alicia Machado back on stage 3 weeks later, or is it now 4 weeks later, that shows you got nothing left in the tank. This is a desperation move. It's her only move, because nothing she says can escape the black hole of all this incoming ammunition. We are looking at all of the weeds and the details of this. Nobody is out there, but what they see is cover up, concealment, and perhaps even lying.
I mean,
there's no way out of that.
If you give them the benefit of the doubt about the dump and you say that they're just trying to get it out, it's still, to Charles' point, messy. And I said today, somebody asked me, and I said it's like Donald Trump's Superstorm Sandy, in that it happens right before an election and it fits the narrative. Like President Obama was saying, I get things done and I work across the aisle. And he shows up in New Jersey and hugs Chris Christie, and suddenly that fits.
It's perception.
Well, this kind of malaise about the Clintons on a number of fronts fits the narrative that Trump's been talking about on the trail.
It's a perception of the deceit, of the cover-up, of the dishonesty, of why we can't trust Hillary Clinton. And that's becoming, I think, just so central to this election, and the fact that Hillary Clinton is not giving a good enough answer, period. She's trying to run out the clock. She hopes that she can get through Election Day by just focusing on Donald Trump. It just leaves the Americans thinking, well, also you have the DOJ serving as sort of the political arm of the Clinton campaign. It's messy. It's why American voters are feeling they can't trust the government, and it's why Hillary Clinton is right now basically trying to have a lifesaver out there to see if she can get through this election and win.
We will talk about the latest specifics about that email investigation. Also, Paul Ryan and his role, what he's doing and saying now. More with the panel when we come back.
The FBI has been frustratingly non-committal, and they don't say a thing when it comes to Donald Trump and investigations against him. Yet when it comes to Hillary Clinton, for some reason, they're more than happy to talk.
Don't you think it's interesting that Hillary's opponent spends all this time talking about this, and yet most of the people who've been heavily involved in protecting the security of this country for the last 20 years in both parties have endorsed her? They know what the real security issue is.
Former President Clinton and the campaign manager, Robbie Mook, talking about the FBI and how it's not fair what James Comey did, releasing that letter. Also talking about the lack of investigation into a connection that they say between Donald Trump and the Russians. The New York Times writes it up this way. Law enforcement officials say that none of the investigations so far have found any conclusive or direct link between Mr. Trump and the Russian government, and even the hacking into the Democratic emails FBI and intelligence officials now believed was aimed at disrupting the presidential election rather than electing Mr. Trump. Our sources point to the same thing. That preliminary inquiry we talked about last night. We're back with the panel. AB, has the focus on James Comey and the Democratic effort to kind of, I heard numerous times that he potentially was like J. Edgar Hoover, an out-of-control FBI director, the guy that they praised just, weeks ago when he finished the first investigation.
Well, I don't want to be repetitive here, but I do have to go back to the fact that when James Comey concluded this investigation, in which he had not impaneled a grand jury, not searched the Clinton Foundation, not allowed the agents to search her home, all of this is out of bounds and out of normal protocol and normal practice, in which 5 grants of immunity were given to her top staffers, not including Abedin, when there was no charge brought. You give immunity when you're going to bring a charge. So now he comes back after being overly transparent on July 5th to coming and sort of giving this cryptic letter in which he doesn't talk about the actual substance of the new findings and why they could be pertinent, and then we find out there was no warrant and he hadn't seen them yet, whatever. So it gives oxygen for the Clinton campaign to continue talking about why this is so unorthodox, particularly when you have Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley, Jim Jordan, the biggest Freedom Caucus guy in the House, who is on the Benghazi committee, making her life miserable, and Alberto Gonzalez, former AG for Bush, saying this is wrong.
Doesn't it also, though, poke the bear and try to get whatever's on that laptop and to say, see, we told you it is illegal?
Look, I think from the Clinton campaign's point of view, the attack on Comey, for the Democrats' attack on Comey, is classic Clinton style. They went after Ken Starr. They made him the boogeyman. They turned the country's anger against him, and they won. They came out of that scandal whole, if not whole, at least alive, which is what Clinton had wanted. But I want to add one point on this Russian bit. I don't understand why people conclude that this is not what the Russians have been doing, the WikiLeaks and the tampering, is not to elect Donald Trump, but simply to disrupt the campaign. We forget 2 things. Trump is running, sorry, that was a Freudian slip. Putin is running a one-man rule in Russia. He decides what happens. And people forget that he has a personal animus against Hillary Clinton. 4 years ago, there were demonstrations when he ran for re-election, demonstrations in Moscow that were hugely embarrassing, that he and his propaganda machine in Russia directly blamed on Hillary. And he's a man who would want revenge and who would get it. And as for if his reasons are not personal but national and realpolitik, why wouldn't he prefer a candidate like Trump, who's been praising of Putin rather than somebody who would likely carry on a more anti-Russian policy? So why it's assumed that they are not doing this, the Russians, deliberately, I don't understand.
Well, I think there are intelligence officials who've pointed to that, but to the specific investigations on the ties, everybody we talked to said there's
no,
just
I
not.
Understand, but you can have all the intelligence information you want, but they're imputing motive to what the Russians are doing. I don't see any intelligence on that explains why it's not a deliberate attempt.
I want to turn quickly, Mercedes, to what Paul Ryan said this morning, that he's basically voted for Donald Trump, although didn't mention his name, and the other Republicans who, like John Kasich, writing in John McCain's name, people who took the pledge during the primary and are not upholding that pledge.
I have to tell you, I've spoken to a number of GOP grassroots activists. They're incredibly upset with the fact that the party has not united around Donald Trump. I think the mere fact that John Kasich decided to write in John McCain, that presents a problem for him politically in the future, for him to even consider running for 2020 if Donald Trump were to lose this election. And I don't think the grassroots activists are about to forget that.
Maybe.
Well, I think John Kasich is a defiant guy and told us a long time ago he wasn't going to support Trump. And I think that if he's not running for 2020, I know that he wants to be a part of rebuilding the Republican Party. And he's going to stick up for the Trump was a mistake wing. And he